Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Mondays Down South. We have a lot to talk about, but before we even say anything about football, there's a reason I wanted to open this episode, and that's because my New York Mets have made the playoffs for the first time in 6 years. I had to give them a shout out. It's been a long struggle, new regime, new developments, new players, new energy, and I'm super excited for postseason run. We've clinched 94 wins. Hopefully we'll get over 100. Hopefully win the division. But anyway, I digress. I had to throw that out there for my Mets. So with that being said,
I might jump in on you because I saw a hilarious tweet. I'm glad you didn't mention the manager. Again, I'm pro Buck again now, but I saw a funny tweet earlier about all the Mets people claiming that Buck should be manager of the year, which I don't really have a problem with, but there was a tweet that was just hilarious. It was like, oh wow, look at what he did with the highest payroll in the league. I think your players deserve more credit than him, but congrats. We'll see what happens in the playoffs. You still got to hold off the Braves, though, for the division. That'll be big.
Yeah, so that's not going to be an easy ride. But
not done yet.
Anyway.
Not done yet.
I think the Orioles are going to need a couple Guinnesses here. I see Size rocking that Guinness shirt from the Island a couple years ago. But looks like the Orioles, despite a great season, they're going to come up just a little bit short there in the wild card, unfortunately.
Made it to early September, but quite a bit short. Tough weekend, and then almost getting no hit by some guy named Tyler Alexander. That was the nail in the coffin last night, if it wasn't already over the weekend. So, but fun season nonetheless.
I feel like with the amount that they've had to go through, the fact that they competed to the level that they did is very commendable, to say the least. So
no complaints.
I think there's a bright future there and a lot of young guys that are showing up. So hey, that's our baseball plug for the week. We haven't talked baseball in a minute. Glad I got to give that shout out. Got to talk our teams, even though Zach claims to be an Orioles fan, but we'll discuss that at a later time. With that being said, we will jump right into NFL. As you guys know, that's usually our subject matter for the fall that we get excited about. We'll get a few things coming to you. First and foremost, and I think the thing that we should just get the ball rolling with is some overreactions from your three hosts for the week. So we're each going to give you an overreaction and then get each other's reactions to our overreaction. Then we'll each give you one more overreaction and then get each person's reactions to our overreaction. So 2 total per host. I'm going to tee it up. Let's go right to Mr. Hokie Nation, Mr. Falcons over there, who almost had a comeback against the Rams this week. I'm sure that was exciting for you, but let's get a little overreaction from Mr. Zach McCulloch.
It wasn't even close. I mean, it was a fun game to watch. Don't get me wrong. It was very interesting at the end. The special teams. I mean, hey, showcasing a little bit of beamer ball out there down south at South Carolina with the Falcons blocking the punt and then causing the fumble there very late against Cooper Kupp, but. Hey, I think the storyline was written. When you're losing 31-10 at one point during the game, including the fourth quarter, normally the Falcons have the lead and then they blow it. This time they were down 21 points and they still failed they still came up short. But anyways, I will say the first of my top 2 overreactions through 2 weeks has to be, and I'm not happy saying this, Baker Mayfield. I thought Baker Mayfield was the knight in shining armor that was going to connect all the dots, all these Tetris pieces in Carolina, make it fit, you win the game, and next thing you know, this team is going to the playoffs. I was so confident that I even put a bet down before the season started of a monetary value I will not want to discuss at this point in time, that the Carolina Panthers would win over 7.5 games. So the problem is the quarterback. And their defense is not terrible. I would consider them somewhat above average. They're playing relatively well. They held the Giants to under 20 points, which I know is not saying a lot, but the Giants are 2-0 at this point, and who knows where they're going to end up. They have a game at home this week, week 3, against the Cowboys, where they really have a plausible chance of going 3-0 at this point. So, Carolina's defense is well structured. They've got good wide receivers. Their running back is a top 3, top 5 running back in the league. Their offensive line takes a step forward with their first-round offensive tackle pick out of NC State, Moton on the right side. It's great, right? Nope, not so fast. Baker Mayfield still is missing throws on crucial 3rd and shorts where they're not converting. Their third down conversion rate is one of the worst in the league. Sam Darnold was a primary blame last season, rightly so. And, it seems like people in Carolina and the Charlotte community are already starting to whisper his name and they want him back, which just goes to show you how bad this team is going to be throughout the trajectory of the season. So that's my point. My overreaction probably stems from the fact that I did consider them a dark horse playoff team. Don't know if I could say that at this point in time. I just can't tell if it's more of a Matt Rule or a Baker Mayfield issue at this point, but Baker is missing key throws, and the entire offense is getting frustrated. There was, McCaffrey is very even-tempered, and he was even caught on camera just like shaking his head, throwing his helmet on the sideline. So there you have it. Carolina Panthers, Baker Mayfield, first overreaction of the day, boys. E, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, I don't see that as an overreaction. I mean, I could have told you that before the season. I don't think a whole lot of people, especially in this trio, were on the Panthers bandwagon.
Right.
I did think Baker would play a little bit better, but I'm not on the Baker train. Ben McAdoo also, man, a complete nightmare hire for you guys at the OC position. This is a rough start. I mean, I don't see how you're going to cover that 7.5 with losses to the Browns without Deshaun and the Giants. So
I checked and I can't cash out the bet anymore.
Vegas is like, we're going to keep this one. We're going to keep this one. But society reactions on the Panthers.
Ev, you hit the nail on the head. I was going to say, instead of an overreaction, this is more of a correction to Zach's overreaction week 1, which I love. Honestly, the only takeaway from that is I think Ev and I are not at all surprised. I'm not even slightly marginally surprised. This is like this is not something I was like, oh, are the Carolinas going to start off 0-2? If somebody told me that, I'm going to be like, yep, that sounds about right. With that being said, I feel really bad for DJ Moore and I feel really bad for Christian McCaffrey because I think those two are two terrific players that I think in better offenses with better quarterbacks or even quarterbacks that can game manage a little bit better, their numbers and their production would be way higher, but somehow they make it work to the best of their abilities, and they just haven't had even a mediocre quarterback since Cam Newton. So since when Cam Newton was, above average. So that's tough for them. So I feel for them. So that's my only real reaction. I just want to see those guys get the opportunity to shine at some point.
Sweet. Well, I can knock it over to while we're picking on Zach. My overreaction is going to pick on Zach a little bit too. So if I'm not mistaken, check out our season preview episode. But I think Zach, you picked the Denver Broncos to win the AFC West. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Yet
completely different. I thought you were talking about the Colts.
Oh no! Well, I'm saving that one for my number 2 overreaction. But
of course
you were hammering the Denver Broncos. So my potential overreaction is that the Denver Broncos organization, their fans, are going to look back on this offseason after a few years and consider it such a disaster that it impacts the franchise for potentially even a decade to come. Russell Wilson, obviously, now with a massive extension, they're going to be paying him a ton of money. I don't have the numbers in front of me. When he's like 40 years old, he already looks horrendous, all right? And I said this offseason. He was coming off the injury with the finger. I gave him an excuse on that. But when you limit his ability to escape the pocket, as they've said they're going to make him a pocket passer, he's just not the same player. I mean, I think one of his strengths was he was able to get out of the pocket, almost how like Kyler does. Not that good of a pocket passer, but he can run around, get outside the pocket, and then Lockett and Metcalf were getting open. And then you add in Nate Hackett, who, again, only 2 games as a head coach, but could not be off to a worse start from a time management perspective. Just looks like someone that doesn't have a clue, quite frankly. And may have been riding the Aaron Rodgers train to this point. So, and you think about these 2 huge decisions, a fan base that was desperate to start winning, new ownership, all these factors. They're already booing and mocking. They're booing Wilson. They're mocking Nate Hackett in the second game of the year. This has the makings of a franchise that, given these decisions, might not win for a very long time if things don't change. And a very upset fan base that might even start to tune out if this doesn't turn around.
Okay, I got a reaction to that. I do think that's an overreaction from Evan. I mean, granted, I didn't pick the Denver Broncos to win the division. I stick with my Chiefs that I picked from the get-go. But at the same time, I do think the Broncos will figure it out. I think obviously Week 2 wasn't amazing, but they obviously played better than they did Week 1. I think Cortland Sutton and Russell Wilson are finally starting to establish their connection a little bit more, and I think that's only going to get better. I think they're going to start realizing they need to just start giving Javonte Williams the ball more than they are to get that offense moving a little bit more. So that's another component. I think the real concern right now is Jerry Jeudy's injury because their offense was predicated on Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy kind of taking the wings of wide receiver and then opening up running lanes. But I'm not as worried about Russell Wilson as maybe Evan is. I'm not saying Wilson's going to go back to that season of where he was throwing close to 4,500 yards and 40 touchdowns. I'm not saying we're going to get that from Wilson, but I certainly think Wilson is still one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, and I think he's a veteran. And I think the Broncos will be right there for the wild card at the end of the season. So I'm not worried about them not being competitive to a certain extent, but I certainly don't see them being a Super Bowl champion this year. So that's where I'm at.
I'd say an overreaction too. I mean, you're going to see a lot of the teams, deviate back to what their standard is, right? Like what they're normally, what's the term, like deviation to the means, right? So I think the Broncos are a good team. We saw the Texans play the Colts well. We can't really figure out how good and bad these teams are. Normally you're able to kind of sniff that out through a couple of weeks in the season, but I think the Colts are really going to start to play well for the sake of my own prediction. Otherwise, I'm going to need a couple more of these beers and just start pounding them at each podcast, given my recent bad takes. But don't sleep on the Broncos. I think they'll figure it out. And if anyone's able to do it, I think it's Russell Wilson. So,
yeah, that kind of tees me up pretty well because we're talking about overreacting to teams that have not played well to start the season. I'm going to take the opposite approach. I'm going to overreact to a team that has arguably played better than anybody else in the NFL and take the opposite mentality, and that is with the Buffalo Bills. Because right now the Buffalo Bills have been on an absolute tear to start off the season, straight up dismantling the Rams and then coming back and dismantling the Titans even more. And I think if every weekly ranking is probably going to have them projected number 1, the best team in the NFL. And I'm going to liken this to, I don't know if you guys remember a year ago when we had an episode when we were reacting a few weeks into the season, and I said there's certain teams that I just think are going to bounce back and do better, and there's certain teams that I think are off to a great start that are going to regress. And this year, the team that I think that is off to an amazing start, that I think is going to have a great regular season record, but I think when it comes down to it, is not going to be a Super Bowl team, or I don't even think it's going to get out of the AFC, is the Buffalo Bills for me. And that's my overreaction, because I think the Buffalo Bills are a terrific team on paper. I think so far in the first 2 weeks they've played out of their minds. They've been amazing. I think that offense looks absolutely lethal, and I think they have great playmakers. So with all that being said, you might think I'm crazy, but there's a certain gut feeling I have that when I think the cards are on the table, I think a team that can learn, or a team that's at least good at managing time of a game, managing how often that offense has the ball, and being able to control the clock more, I think we'll be able to beat the Buffalo Bills when push comes to shove. So I'm throwing that out there right now before the whole world gets on the Bills bandwagon and nobody else has a bad thing to say about them or a con to say about them. I'm saying it right now.
So, but you're referencing information from last year's side, and that's propagating this view of this year. And the reason I challenge you here is, who have they played the first 2 games of the season? They played the number 1 seed in the AFC and the number 1 seed in the NFC from last year's playoff bracket. And they've dismantled both of those teams. And not only have dismantled them, they've won in very consistent fashion, where it's not like they put up a ton of points in the first half and then they went completely Mr. Irrelevant in the second half. They've dominated from start to finish both of those games. So I think you're implying that they're going to implode in the playoffs, because that's what they've done the last couple of years under McDermott. And I get why you're saying that, but I just don't see any track record of that happening this season.
Sorry, go ahead, E. I'll let you react and then give my take back to Zach.
Yeah, so I'm going to disagree with this take. I'm obviously on the Bills train. I think there is something to say about fading all the hype around the Bills, because they haven't really proven it in the playoffs yet. But so my third overreaction that I was going to save, because we'll only have time for 2 each, that I'll just throw out here quickly here, is the Buffalo Bills might go 20-0 this year, which is obviously the complete opposite of what Cy just went. So to Zach's point, I just don't, and I said this before, I really don't see a weakness on that team. I think to Cy's point a little bit, their formula is typically to take a big lead, and then they have a good defense. So it's like it's hard for teams to come back on them as well because they can score at will. So it's like once they get out to that lead, and then they just thump people, and some of these scores get ugly. So I think, to Sai's point a little bit, maybe they need to prove that they can win grinded out games and not like everything's a shootout and like when they really got to kind of control the clock and grind it out. But I don't know, man. It's going to be hard for anyone to beat the Bills this year, I think. So 20-0, first team in NFL history to go 20-0. Let's see it.
I love it because that makes my reaction feel like a strong overreaction, because obviously you guys are giving me very polar opposite reactions, which is what I want here. Because I'm not living basically in the past, Zach, for me specifically. I'm not saying just because they haven't been able to win in the playoffs in prior years that they're not going to do it this year. I'm just saying, yeah, they've walloped two teams who were both great last year. But even those teams, if we're going to talk about the fact that they were great last year, then that's living in the past too, right? My point is, currently, right now, yeah, they've walloped two teams, and we haven't necessarily seen the flaws, but I still think the flaws exist in the sense of they can't run the football. They can't control the clock by running the football. So sure, if they can decimate a team through the air and take massive leads, then it's going to be really hard for any team to beat them. But if they play a well-balanced team who on the flip side can run the football, and you might think Tennessee would be able to run the football, but given how terrible Ryan Tannehill has been as a passer, I think it's made it really hard for them to establish the run because people just stack the box against Derrick Henry, and Tannehill is not able to take advantage of that. I'm saying going forward, if they play a team that can both run the football and game manage by passing the football, I think the flip side to that is they can control the clock, because I don't think the Bills are going to be a team that's good at controlling the clock. I think they're a team that's great at just dominating on the offensive front by passing. But if a team can slow them down just a little bit, nothing about them has proven to me that they can, at least in games that I've seen where they've been put in that position, has shown me that they can do that. And that's my only take, right? Like I don't want to live in the past, but that's why I'm making this reaction now before it happens. And then
it's an interesting point. I love how you guys are on two complete opposite ends of the totem pole here. I probably lean more Evan's direction, but I'm curious to see how this is going to play out. What I'll do for my overreaction, my second one, is I'll actually stay in the division, AFC East. Let's talk about those Dolphins. Because my overreaction was underestimating Mike McDaniels as a coach. I even said it in the first podcast. I said, you know what? He's a mathematician. He's a genius. I'm not denying any of that. But he's a great offensive coordinator, right? He's a great supplier of information to a head coach who's going to ultimately make these decisions, even though I know he was calling the plays in San Francisco and whatnot. But Mike McDaniel actually recently came out in a press conference and he said his life is easier now than it was previously, maybe because of the personnel he has. But he said the infrastructure that's in place makes his job easier as a head coach than it did. Maybe the reliance on him being an OC, it kept him up at night, I guess, a little bit more. Maybe he wasn't ready for the role then. Who knows? He said the life's easier right now in Miami. Don't blame him when you got a guy like Tyreek Hill, who I'm pretty sure had 2 fourth quarter 50-yard touchdown receptions. And you got a guy like Jaden Waddle who scored 2 times as well. That offense is lethal. It was against one of the best defenses in the league, in the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore, which is a really tough place to play. I think my overreaction was underestimating Mike McDaniel and just thinking that they were going to start really slow because he was going to have to pick this head coaching thing up through trial and error, maybe clock mismanagement, some of that stuff. So unbelievable. Hats off to him and the Miami Dolphins with their 2-0 start.
All right, I'm going to say that's actually a slight overreaction to the Dolphins. I do think, like I said, in the offseason, they're kind of rebuilding the San Francisco model, but now you could argue they have a better quarterback that can make more plays than Jimmy G, and they also have better weapons on the outside with Hill and Waddle. Worst run game in San Francisco has been able to develop, but I still think it's an overreaction. Baltimore's pass D last year was I think bottom 3 in the NFL, and it should be better this year just with health and some of the additions, but I'm still not sold that they're really that amazing of a defense yet. And really, it's an amazing comeback, but really they just hit a couple pop plays on Tyreek Hill, caught the Ravens napping, got back into the game, and then pulled it out late. So, and in week 1 wasn't particularly impressive offensively. Now, granted, the Patriots have a solid D, so I just need to see more of it. So I'm going to say overreaction to the Dolphins a little bit here.
With that being said, I do want to give one more overreaction because I think my last one relates very directly to a lot of what we just talked about. To jump right back into it, gentlemen, I think my final overreaction, and I think this is very relatable to some of the reactions that we have had, and that reaction is that I actually believe, and this is not something that if I said this to myself a year ago, I probably would have laughed at myself. But I actually strongly believe now that outside of the quarterback position, specifically outside of the quarterback position, because obviously quarterbacks are, the most important players on a team, I believe wide receivers should be the most paid and most valued positions in the NFL, in the modern NFL, with what we prioritize and with how it's relating to team success. And I was just thinking out loud a little bit this weekend. But when you look at the teams that we expected to be very good coming into the season, and you look at the teams that have maybe overperformed under expectations, or teams that have been even better than we already thought they were going to be, in the sense of them being great, the one thing that I keep finding a correlation with is we just talked about the Dolphins, we just talked about the Bills, we talked about a lot of other teams. The flip side of that, we talked about teams like the Broncos, teams like the Colts, and the one big difference I'm realizing with teams that are, setting the class of it all is the wide receiver position. And guys like Stephon Diggs this weekend, guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, guys like Jamar Chase last year and Cooper Kupp last year. These are the guys that have really made the difference between the team being a Super Bowl contender and a team not being able to make that jump, in my opinion. And when I think about it, obviously the Christian Kirk contract was something that we gave a lot of crap to, things like that. And I think maybe teams are in their way overreacting, no pun intended, to the market. But when you think about it, it really is the wide receiver position that has been setting these Super Bowl caliber teams apart. And my Colts are a perfect example of that. Like, Michael Pittman played week 1, and I think Pittman's on his way to being a legitimate receiver, but I think part of what's been a struggle for us is week 1 we had to start relying on him a ton, and that's how we came back in the game. And then he gets hurt, and this week against the Jaguars we posted an absolute dud. And I'm not saying that's only on not having Pittman, but it just goes to show that none of our receivers could create separation, and that was a huge difference in the modern NFL. So I'm using my Colts as an example.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you, Sai, that wide receiver is kind of the premium position outside of quarterback in the NFL. I saw a stat, it's more fantasy relevant, but it's like something about how if you look at the top-rated fantasy running backs and compare them to the top-rated fantasy wide receivers, the top-rated fantasy wide receivers deliver on a much more consistent basis. And you look at it this year with, Taylor had a bad game given the blowout loss. Derrick Henry's another one that without the passing game, he's, kind of getting shut down a little bit. So Mixon was another one that didn't have a good game this week. But, Jefferson, Kupp, those kind of guys, although Jefferson was a little quiet this week, but, they're always delivering over a season-long basis. But the one challenge I'll disagree with you is something we've talked about before, and I think it's a good point, is, drafting receivers. I agree wide receiver is a premium position that you need to have high-end talent at, but, do you need to pay for it? When you can just go out and draft a receiver in the first round and get Drake London, who looks incredible, Garrett Wilson, who's popping off, and, the guys from last year. I mean, even, Treylon Burks looks pretty good, and he was getting destroyed in preseason. So, Jahan Dotson, my guy, 3 touchdowns in 2 games, it seems pretty easy to draft a receiver, so I don't know if you have to pay for it, but you definitely need premium talent at those positions.
I'll tell you why you're wrong, Ev. And the reason you're wrong is because of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Jalen Hurts has not only taken another step forward, but do you really think that Jalen Hurts would have the amount of running room that he has now, and Miles Sanders the amount of running room he has now? Because they can't stack 9 in the box. These defenses that are playing against them, why can't they stack 9 in the box? Because they have Devonta Smith, who's a great receiver that was drafted, but has yielded no respect to any defensive coordinator in the NFL. The true difference there was bringing in A.J. Brown and having him go off that first week as a true, legitimate Tier 1 caliber wide receiver that is going to be respected by any defense. Now that you have him on one side of the field and you have Devonta on the other side, that is a very fearsome offense, and you see Jalen Hurts take a huge step forward. So, ultimately, I think that's the big difference maker, where I actually do agree with Sai. I think it's a great point he brought up, is if you want to go get your player that's really going to enhance your franchise, go pay for him. Go pay for him. Like, you're even seeing Curtis Samuel. Curtis Samuel has multiple touchdown receptions in 2 games for the Commanders. They went out and they paid 3-year, $33 million for him, right? $11 million a year is a little expensive, but when you're getting that production value out of him, why not go for it? I just think the big difference there is a guy like A.J. Brown and the Eagles, because obviously they've taken a huge step forward.
So not every team is the Eagles that just is completely inept at drafting wide receivers when they took Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson, 1 pick apart. and also JJ Arcega-Whiteside. And Christian Kirk as well, man. Christian Kirk's fitting the bill. Go ahead,
I'll also say this though. I think you kind of made my point for me, Ab. I think the part of the reason that you should pay those receivers is, yeah, draft them. I'm not saying you have to pay them off free agency. I'm saying draft them, then pay them, because it seems like receiver is the one position nowadays with the passing league, with the way the NFL is, that you know that you're going to get consistent production from these guys year over year, and that they're going to set you apart. So if you sign Justin Jefferson, don't trade him away the way the Titans just traded away A.J. Brown. Sign that guy no matter what amount of money it takes, if that's going to help your team be relevant and help your team make the playoffs, and keep those guys is what I'm saying. That's why I would pay those kinds of guys a lot. Like, I'm not a big proponent of, you guys know me, I was given the Commanders crap for Curtis Samuel when they paid him a ton from a different team. Now, granted, maybe he'll prove me wrong if he keeps up what he's done this season thus far. Same thing with Christian Kirk. We were given the Jaguars crap because we felt like they overpaid. Who knows what's going to come out of that? But the flip side of that is that's kind of my other point. Like, if you draft a guy that's a game breaker, a wide receiver, which seems like people are doing more and more, sign him, because that's the guy you know is going to make a difference in your franchise. That's basically what I'm saying. But
Can't argue that. I know what I would pay for. If there's one thing I would pay for in the NFL, it would be to see Marshawn Lattimore and Mike Evans square off in the boxing ring. I would pay top dollar Mondays Down South tickets for that, because it happens every year. And Brady starts it every year, I feel like, too. So, just wanted to throw that out there.
I don't know about that. They were having those scraps well before Brady got there. They were fighting plenty when it was Jameis on the Bucs.
That's right.
Jameis was on the Bucs and Drew Brees was on the Saints. They were going at each. It's just something about those two where they know that they've been top 5 to top 10 at their position for so long, and they're division rivals. There's something really fun about that chirpiness.
Yeah, I feel like Mike, he got a little bit of control on it, but now he just needs the smallest thing to set him off, and he's always going to come with that same move that, it's not a punch, it's just like a shove to the head. But it's like the same move every time. But hey, it's clockwork, and he actually got suspended for it this time. So we'll see how that impacts the 4:30 game that we'll talk about in a little bit here. But I think that's it for overreactions. I didn't get my second one. I'm going to sneak it in without any opportunity for rebuttal from you guys, especially Cy. But the Jaguars are going to win that division. That's my overreaction. Hey,
I'm not going to react.
No reaction.
I'm not going to.
All right, so let's pivot in here. I know we're trying to get a little bit away from kind of the standard recaps we've done in the past, but we do obviously want to make sure we hit on all of the kind of key topics from last week. So I guess, boys, we kind of want to do it how we did in last year. Maybe take 10 minutes just to pick out some things we didn't cover in our overreaction segment. I can start us off here. Chiefs go back all the way to Thursday night, but Chargers had another opportunity to prove that they've kind of surpassed the Chiefs as the favorites in the AFC West. Couldn't do it. Chiefs still on top.